Boldwood presents One in a Million, written by Della Galton and read by Karen Cass. Chapter 1. The first thing SJ noticed was the tinny, metallic taste in her mouth, and then came the thirst. The thirst was so bad, it had got into her dreams and forced her awake. No, not awake. Aware. A slowly growing awareness which was coming sense by sense. Like sound, she could hear an echoey blur of footsteps and voices which rolled in and out of her head. Closer by, something electronic beeped. Beep, 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 steady and rhythmic. Beep, beep, beep. Where was she? SJ opened her eyes and was hit by a wall of light. She shut them swiftly. She felt as though she was made of crystal, cool and brittle. She was a thin glass person who could be shattered by the slightest touch. After a while, she tried opening her eyes again. This time the room swam in various shades of light, but she managed to squint long enough to focus. To her left was a tall metal stand with a clear bag of fluid clipped to the top. To her right was a machine, which was the source of the beeping. Against her cheek was the edge of a thin blue woven sheet, but it felt more like a tablecloth than a sheet. She shifted away from its roughness, and her head spun. "So you're awake, then?" A blurred face came into view. SJ made out red lipstick, a thin line of a nose, kind eyes. "Drink?" SJ gasped. The face moved away, then loomed back in, and she was aware of a straw close to her mouth. "Take it steady." Ignoring the advice, SJ sucked greedily and her throat was awash with coolness, the wonderful coolness of water. And then she was retching, choking, drowning. A firm hand supported her back. "Easy does it." She tried again, more carefully and with more success. "You're in the intensive care unit," the voice explained, but SJ wasn't really listening, didn't really care. The need for water blanked out every other sense, every other feeling. It was about 30 seconds later that the pain kicked in. There was a deep ache in her lower back, sparked off by the movement of leaning forward. She moaned, and the voice returned. "Gently does it, love. Slowly, slowly." The other voices, the further away voices, were still rumbling in the background, and now she could make out odd snatches. "She's in a very weakened condition. I really wouldn't advise visitors." "I want to bloody well see her. Tell him, Jim. Tell him we want to bloody well see her now." Oh God, that was her mother. What was her mother doing here? And why was she swearing? She never swore. Something bad must have happened. Something very, very bad. Beneath the awful aching, her heart began to thump harder, and the beep of the machine sped up to keep time. Then, all at once, they were there, the lumbering shadows of her parents sliding into the light. Her father, bulky and silent. He never said much. He couldn't get a word in edgeways most of the time. And her mother, in her Evans black and white knitted jacket. "Oh, Sarah Jane, whatever are we going to do with you? Whatever are we going to do with her, Jim?" Another bad sign. Mum using her full name, and her usually ruddy cheeks were pale, and she didn't look as though she'd combed her hair lately. She was shaking her head now, a frown creasing her forehead. Her face was reproachful. "It's okay." SJ was desperate to reassure them, but her voice came out as a squeak, and she saw there was a cannula in the back of her hand, which was attached to a wire, which in turn led to another machine. "Oh," SJ said, trying again to speak. "Oh. Oh. What's she saying, Jim? Do you think we should call the doctor?" Something niggled at the back of SJ's mind. It was something to do with a party. Had she been at a party? A snapshot of memory drifted in. Herself draped on a chair, watching someone walk across the terracotta carpet, carrying a tray of mushroom vol au vents. "SJ, love, can you hear me?" The kindness of her father's voice brought a sharp ache to her throat.
SJ, lovey.
He'd moved closer to the bed, and he picked up the hand without the cannula in a fumbling, awkward kind of way. They had never been a touchy-feely family, and when she looked up at him, she saw his eyes were full of tears, and the ache in her throat intensified. Dad never cried. He was trying very hard not to do it now. He sniffed twice and rubbed his cheek with the side of his index finger, a tiny little movement that broke SJ's heart. She couldn't speak, and she couldn't bear to see the pain on his face. Shutting her eyes again to blot it out, she let herself drift backwards into the soft black space of her mind. The next thing SJ was conscious of was someone taking her pulse. It was the nurse who'd given her the water. She had tiredness lines around her eyes and spoke gently. "How are you feeling?"
Quite bad.
SJ heard her own voice come out, hoarse and unused. The nurse wrote something on a clipboard. "You've got a visitor, if you're up to it." As she spoke, another woman slid into view. She was small and serious-looking, with bobbed hair and owlish glasses. "Hello, Sarah Jane. I'm Dr. Maria Costello. I'm from the Mental Health Liaison Team. I'd like to have a little chat with you, if I may." SJ nodded. Although her consent was clearly not required, the doctor had already pulled up a chair. "Do you know why you're here?"
No. Have you come to tell me what's wrong with me?
"Would you like me to tell you what's wrong with you?"
Yes, please.
SJ lay back on her pillow, exhausted with the effort of speaking. Everything still hurt, and she could smell alcohol-based hand wash. It was beginning to make her feel sick. She watched the doctor's face through half-closed eyes. Shadowy memories lurched at the back of her mind, and she was about to say,
"No, stop. I've changed my mind. I don't want to know."
But it was too late. The doctor was speaking in crisp, precise words. "You are suffering from alcoholic poisoning. Yesterday afternoon, your husband found you unconscious at home, and he called an ambulance. If he hadn't acted as quickly as he did, you wouldn't be here. The quantities of alcohol we washed out of your stomach were more than enough to kill you." SJ covered her face with her hands. The memories were taking form, becoming less shadowy, forcing their way up to the surface. There had been some terrible argument with Tom. She'd been trying to stop him leaving the house. She was holding his arm and he was trying to shake her off, and his face had been grimmer than she'd ever seen it, as if he really hated her, as if he couldn't bear to be married to her for a moment longer. Other images were coming too, only these were more detached. She was watching herself from a distance. She was watching herself crossing the hallway of their house, going into the lounge and unscrewing the lid of the gin bottle. She could see her own hands getting out glasses and lining them up, a long line of glasses on the drinks cabinet. 4 crystal tumblers, 2 pewter tankards, 5 little shot glasses Tom used for whiskey chasers if ever he was in the mood, and 1 commemorative wineglass with the words, "Sarah Jane and Tom, on their wedding day, August 2023, inscribed on the side. "I did this to myself," she said in horror. The doctor's voice was very serious, almost cold. "Are you conscious of the danger you placed yourself in? Yesterday afternoon, you drank almost a full litre bottle of gin. I'd like you to tell me why." Chapter 2. 3 months earlier. The terrifying part would be pressing the button on the intercom beside the grimy, frosted glass door. Before she did that, SJ could have been any other office worker on the busy Soho street, with nothing more important on her mind than where to go for lunch. Fat Hippo for a katsu sando, or McDonald's for a burger. Oh, what she would have given to be a normal office worker. She could still run away, phone up later and say she'd been ill or had to work. She probably needn't even phone. These places must get loads of people who made appointments and didn't turn up. No doubt they were used to it. Her legs were too rubbery to run anywhere. SJ glanced over her shoulder. No one was paying her the slightest attention. Thank God. Her outfit, overloud floral leggings and her hideously expensive monsoon jacket, red for confidence, had been a mistake. She should have worn a wig and dark glasses and a huge trench coat. On second thoughts, that would have attracted a fair bit of attention in the June heat. Everyone else was in summer dresses or shorts. A few hundred yards away, 2 council workers in yellow high-vis jackets had coned off a section of curb and were digging up the road. The faint smell of tar mingled with traffic fumes on the summer air. Taking a deep breath, SJ stabbed at the intercom button. Now she was committed. Please let them open the door quickly before someone she knew strolled by and spotted her. A buzzer indicated the catch had been released, and she hurtled inside and found herself in a hallway with a discreet sign, SAD, which stood for Soho Advice for Alcohol and Drug Dependency. Someone had graffitied an O on the end of the acronym in black pen. SJ swallowed. That felt about right. There was an arrow pointing upwards. A guy in a baseball cap was coming down the stairs. He smiled, and she forced a rictus grin and hoped he'd assume she was a counsellor. Her shoulder-length dark hair was pinned up in a look which aimed to be grunge, but she had a sneaking suspicion looked more dragged through a hedge backwards, and she smelled of the Miss Dior that Tom had given her for her birthday. She was not a shambling wreck. She hadn't even had a cigarette before she came. Well, one quick one when she'd got off the tube, but she'd had 3 mints since then. Another man carrying a file met her at the top. He smiled too, and she gave him a friendly nod. Pretend you're here for a doctor's appointment. Nothing to worry about, just a routine visit to the doctor. No, bad idea. She hated going to the doctor. She realised suddenly that he was speaking.
Sarah Carter,
he repeated. Yep, that's me. Her face blazed with embarrassment. She'd always been hopeless at lying.
Hi, I'm Kit. Go straight in. Door at the end. I'll be right with you. Can I get you a coffee?
Thanks. She escaped into a cell-like room furnished with a 2-seater sofa, an armchair and a small table on which sat a box of economy tissues and a wire tray of leaflets. On the wall was a Van Gogh print, one corner peeling away from the frame. It showed a small child supported by his mother and heading towards his father on tottering toddler legs. It was titled, First Steps. Well, even she could see the wry aptness of that one. In any other circumstances, she would have smiled. A spider plant spilled out of a pot on the table. The earth around it was bone dry. Poor little plant must be desperate for a drink. Oh God, perhaps the spider plant was some sort of in-joke between the counsellors. That couldn't be right. They shouldn't be taking the piss. They were supposed to be sympathetic and nice. She remembered the sign downstairs. So it was an acronym, but it was pretty flaming appropriate. Shuddering, she chose the armchair by the table and picked up a leaflet. How to get help if you or your family is suffering from alcoholism or drug abuse. Oh, crap. She jammed it back in the stand, opened her bag, switched off her mobile, and tucked an escaping Tampax back into its compartment. Why did anything embarrassing in your bag always gravitate towards the top, ready to fall out and humiliate you when you opened it? Fleetingly, she considered escape, but before she could move, the door opened and Kit reappeared with 2 mugs.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
He put them on the table, and she thanked him numbly. He didn't need to apologise. He wasn't late. She was early. It still wasn't quite midday. She'd been so early she'd actually gone an extra 2 stops on the tube and walked back, not wanting to arrive too soon in case she bumped into anyone she knew and they asked where she was going. Kit sat opposite her on the sofa, looking relaxed. No closed body language there. SJ put her bag on the floor so it looked less like a shield and made a conscious effort to unclasp her hands, uncross her legs, and look natural. She knew all about body language. Having rearranged herself, she turned her attention back to Kit. He looked like a young Bryan Adams, dark eyes and a craggy lived-in face. It had been a waste of time dressing up. He wore jeans and a white t-shirt. Still, at least he wasn't some shrink with a load of psychobabble to throw at her. She wondered if Kit was his real name. Probably not. She had a feeling people who worked in these places didn't give clients their real names in case they turned out to be nutcases. Well, Sarah wasn't her real name either. So they were on an equal footing. Ha!
Anything we discuss in this room is completely confidential.
His voice was Brian Adams too, gravelly from years of smoking.
And won't be disclosed to anyone else without your permission.
She nodded, relieved he didn't have a notebook or pen. She didn't want anything she said put on record on some central government database that might get hacked next week.
So, where would you like to start, Sarah?
Where do you usually start? Her voice sounded normal. Hey, she could be at the doctor's discussing her blood pressure. Good job she wasn't. It must be sky high. She could feel her heart pounding away in time with the faint sounds of the drill, which had started up again outside.
You said on the phone you were concerned about your alcohol consumption. So, how about you tell me how much you usually drink?
Sure, well, I don't drink in the day. Unless it's Sunday lunch. Just the evenings. And then I don't have one until 9 or past. I'm too busy, you see. Another lie. But so far so good. In a minute, he'd ask her why she was here, and she could say it had all been a mistake. A phone call made after a particularly bad night when she was feeling depressed. But that was probably more age than excess. Everyone got hangovers when they got past 35, didn't they? He nodded.
So, when you do drink, after 9, what would you have on an average day?
His voice was mild and not at all judgmental. That was easy. Wine, white wine usually, with dinner, you know, like everyone. Another little nod.
How many glasses would you have?
2 or 3. It depends on the size of the glasses. They vary so much these days, don't they?
Would it be easier if you told me in terms of how much of the bottle you had? Would you drink maybe half a bottle? Or more than that?
More than that, she said without thinking. I mean, half a bottle is nothing, is it? Everyone has half a bottle of wine with dinner. He smiled.
3/4?
Yes, I'd say it was usually 3/4. Occasionally the whole bottle, but not always. Maybe if I'd had a particularly stressful day, or if I was up late.
Do you drink on your own? Or with a partner?
She was ready for this. It was one of the questions on the "Are you an alcoholic" form she'd found online. If you drank alone, you were a sado-alky, but if you were sharing the wine with someone else, you were okay. Not that she exactly shared the wine, because Tom didn't like white much, luckily, but he often had a glass of red. My husband's usually around, she said firmly.
But not always.
No, he sometimes works late, so I might have the odd glass before he gets in.
But not the whole 3/4 of a bottle.
Well, possibly I might, if he was working very late. How had she fallen into that one? I mean, if I didn't, I wouldn't have a drink at all, would I?
And would that bother you? Not having a drink at all?
No, I don't think so. Her hands felt slippery, and she could feel sweat dripping down the back of her neck. Flustered, she stared at a paperclip on the grey carpet just in front of Kit's trainer. The truth was, she couldn't remember the last day she hadn't had a few glasses of wine, so she didn't know whether not having it would bother her. After a slight pause, she told him this. After all, she wasn't in denial about how much she drank. If she was an alcoholic, she would have been. That was a big part of the illness. It was almost the definition. If you thought you were an alcoholic, then you probably weren't. She'd been clinging to that little truth for a while. But instead of condemning her as an alcoholic, Kit changed tack.
Do you ever drink anything else besides wine, Sarah?
The fact he'd used her alias reminded her that whatever she told him would be attributed to someone else, And feeling a strange sense of liberation, she confessed she drank gin and tonic too, not much, a couple of bottles a month. She knew this because she put at least one empty bottle in the green recycling bin every fortnight, never more than 2. She was quite proud of that, although occasionally she put the recycling bin that contained innocuous plastic shampoo bottles and milk containers over the one that contained glass in case the neighbours took more than a passing interest.
So you're mixing your drinks?
He asked, unexpectedly, and she stared at him. Is that bad? He paused, and suddenly she'd had enough. In the cold light of day, listing all her drinks like this sounded a lot worse than it felt. It wasn't as though she ever got drunk. Well, very occasionally she did, but hardly ever. Not one of her friends had ever commented on how much she drank, although, come to think of it, she'd had an awful lot of jokey, drink-related birthday cards this year. Not even Tom had commented. Mind you, he didn't comment on much she did. He was too tied up with his job to notice. She wanted to get out of here. She'd only come to reassure herself her drinking habits were normal. For heaven's sake, if you were French, you drank gallons of wine. The French had the stuff with every meal. A 10-year-old French child probably drank more than she did. But before she left, she really needed to establish she was fine and didn't have a problem. Otherwise, the whole embarrassing experience would be a waste of time. Am I drinking too much? She asked, glad her voice sounded perfectly calm. I mean, I know I'm not teetotal, but I'm not too OTT, am I?
Do you know what the recommended amount of alcohol units for women is?
Kit smiled, as if they were about to share some private joke. Reassured, she smiled back. Yes, it's something absurd, like 21 units a week.
A bit less than that. It's 14 units.
She waved a hand, feeling in control again. Everyone knows that's ridiculous. It's like the government recommendation for eating 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. A nice idea, but utterly unrealistic. I mean, no one lives like that. Her stomach rumbled at the thought of food. She'd been too anxious to eat breakfast. At least she didn't feel sick anymore. She glanced at the clock. Soon this would be over and she could escape and get something to eat.
Sarah, from what you've told me, you're drinking at least 14 units a day. So in a week you'd be drinking, what, almost 7 times the recommended limit?
His voice was soft, completely non-judgmental, but the words hit her like a bucket of ice. For a few seconds, she was too shocked to speak. The little room felt oppressive, and her head was spinning. No longer caring about body language, she hugged her arms around her and closed her eyes for good measure so she didn't have to look at him. Shit. Am I? She whispered.
According to what you've told me, yes. I could list all the damaging effects of alcohol, what it's doing to your body, but you don't need me to do that, do you? You're obviously bright. You can work it out for yourself.
When she forced herself to return his gaze, his eyes were gentle, but he was no longer smiling. She nodded, wondering if she looked as shaken as she felt. Yeah, I can work it out. But just because I drink a lot, it doesn't mean I'm an alcoholic. She had to force the word out. I mean, I can still do my job fine. I'm good at it.
I can't tell you what you are or what you aren't. You came here because you were worried. All I can tell you are the facts. It's up to you to decide what you want to do from here.
She let that sink in, and she chewed the inside of her mouth, longing for a cigarette and trying to get her head back into some kind of normal thinking pattern. Everything seemed distant now. The sound of the drill, the drone of traffic, all muted, as if she was in a little bubble of unreality while the real world went on outside the window, unconcerned.
We can help you, if you want some help. It's up to you.
What do I need to do? In answer, he got up and came across the small space between them. He had some papers in his hand. Where had those come from? He crouched beside her chair and showed her the forms.
This one's a confidentiality agreement. We'll need you to sign it. This one tells you what we're about and gives you information about our appointment system, our aims and objectives, and our mission statement.
Everyone has a mission statement these days, don't they?
He rocked back on his heels and smiled at her. Yeah, I guess they do. She was relieved she could still joke about things like mission statements. Paperwork she was familiar with. The A-level English course she taught at Hackney College was riddled with admin. They were on the same side. They could laugh at mission statements together. This other form's self-explanatory, but I would like to go through it before you go. You don't have to put anything personal on it, but you will need to fill it in. Then you bring it back next week so we can discuss it. If you're coming back next week. Are you? Would you like me to make another appointment?
Yes, she said slowly. I think maybe I would. Chapter 3. 20 minutes later, SJ was outside again. The roadworks team had downed tools and disappeared. People in suits were hurrying along the pavements, juggling their mobiles with take-out coffees, lunch on the run. A big issue seller was arguing with a black cab driver about change. On the opposite side of the street, a man with mad black hair and a scruffy denim jacket was staggering out of the George. When she'd phoned the helpline, the receptionist had told her the drop-in centre was opposite a pub. Bit ironic, she'd said. Ironic wasn't the word for it. SJ gazed back at the drunk. He could hardly stand up, and it wasn't yet 1 o'clock. He lurched against the wall of the pub. She felt an unexpected wave of sympathy which she hastily suppressed. He was a proper alcoholic. She didn't even think about drinking in the day. How could she possibly be the same as him? Everything around her looked normal, but she didn't feel normal inside. She felt as though part of her world had been jolted off its axis. It was ridiculous. She was still the same person she'd been before she went into SAD. She didn't ever have to go back. Even though she'd made another appointment, she could cancel it. They just needed 24 hours' notice. Then someone more in need of their services could take her place. Like that man across the street. Perhaps she should go back in and tell someone and they could hook him in and dry him out or whatever they did to people with real problems. Remembering her mobile, she switched it on and a message flashed up on the screen. Hi, hun. Long time no see. When can you do lunch? Tania, XX. She lit a silk cut and phoned her. It was a relief to hear her friend's voice, a thread of normality through the weirdness of the day. So, how's it going, SJ? Fine, absolutely fine, she replied, knowing she'd have said that if her leg was dropping off. How's you, keeping busy? Not too bad. Tania was an accountant, although she was as far from the stereotype as it was possible to get. How about you? You up for lunch sometime? Yeah, sure. Hey, I don't suppose you fancy lunch now, do you, Tania? Are you in your office? I'm near Chinatown. Say if you're busy. I'm never too busy for a girly lunch. Her friend laughed throatily. She had the sexiest laugh on the planet, and it wasn't a cultivated thing. From her wild red hair to her outrageously short skirts, nothing about Tania was cultivated. Tania's laugh put some perspective back into things, and SJ relaxed a little. She hadn't realised she was so tense until she felt her neck muscles unknot. I'll meet you at All Bar One in New Oxford Street in around 10, Tania was saying. Mine's a white wine if you get there first. Standard, not one of those bucket-sized glasses you drink. I'm seeing a client this afternoon. Okay, SJ said, feeling guilty and thinking of the form she was supposed to fill in. She was pretty sure people with drink problems, even minor ones, shouldn't go into wine bars. It was the equivalent of a dieter going into a cake shop and drooling over the cream donuts. Far too much temptation. Bollocks. She could have a Diet Coke. It wasn't like she needed to drink. Minutes later, she went through the plate glass doors of the bar. To be honest, she didn't much like All Bar One. It was a bit too well lit, a bit too fresh-faced and samey. She preferred old-fashioned pubs like the Red Lion in Dagenham, which was where she taught poetry and a pint on a Wednesday night. A-level English and writing features for the Glossies was her day job. poetry and a pint was a fun extra. The Red Lion was all beams and dark corners, with a landlord called Brian, who was a bit grumpy but let her have the room upstairs dirt cheap, on the proviso she encouraged her students to drink as many pints as possible without falling over. Maybe she didn't like all bar one because she was too old, SJ thought with a pang. The place was staffed by pimply lads who didn't look old enough to be serving, and bored-looking teenage girls who made her feel about 100. She went to the bar, dry-mouthed and tense, and heard herself ordering 2 dry white wines. Yes, that's standard ones, please. How had that happened? She'd meant to order Diet Coke. She fumbled for her debit card. That damn Tampax had escaped again. Her rummaging caused it to spring to the top of her bag and poke out like some proud paper erection. Shoving it back down and ignoring the barman's smirk, she pinged her card against the reader. She'd save a fortune if she only drank what she'd said she would this week. If she gave up smoking too, she'd be a millionaire. There was always a bright side, wasn't there? Not that she paid for much of the wine she drank at home. Tom ordered it by the case and refilled the fridge every time it was empty. He never complained she drank too much. He only complained if she opened one of the reds he was saving for a special occasion. That was good timing, Tania said from behind her. Thanks. Shall we find a table? Are we eating? Shall I grab a menu? Handing them leather-bound menus, the 10-year-old barman stared at Tania's legs. Oblivious to his gaze, Tania sashayed across the room like a catwalk model. SJ wished she had legs like Tania's. The 2 women were the same height, but while Tania had legs to die for, hers were too thick, and hairy if she didn't shave them constantly. The downside of having nearly black hair and olive skin. SJ wished she was red-haired and glamorous like Tania. High-maintenance legs like hers were best kept covered up, although slightly less floral overload would have worked better. Nevertheless, no one should be subjected to her legs without a government health warning. So what's new? Tania pulled out 2 stools at a table near a window. You sounded weird on the phone. Did I? SJ stared at her drink. The pale liquid glowed enticingly in reflected sunlight. Never had it looked so much like nectar, but, inexplicably, she was scared to take a sip. Yes, you did. Are you all right? What's up? Is it work? SJ looked into Tania's concerned green eyes and frowned. She thought she'd hidden her feelings better than that. She had no intention of telling Tania where she'd just been. Already the shame of her appointment was sliding into the past. She'd just go there for a few sessions, get some tips on how to cut down, and then, with luck, she'd be sorted, and there'd be no need to tell anybody, ever. She took a sip of her drink and glanced around. It wasn't busy for a Tuesday lunchtime. No one was near enough to overhear. I'm fine. Work's fine. I've just got another commission for good housekeeping. Then another 3 weeks and the summer is mine. Well, apart from poetry and a pint, but that's a walk in the park compared to Macbeth and Wuthering Heights. Everything's cool. She stretched her hands above her head to demonstrate how utterly cool everything was, and narrowly avoided falling off her stool, which was designed for perching on and looking good, but not relaxing. But Tania, who was one of the most perceptive people she knew, wasn't easily deflected. You're a rubbish liar, SJ. Come on, I'm your best friend. Tell me what's up. I might be able to help. And even if I can't, well. She spread her hands apart. Her fingernails were painted white with little red crosses in honour of the England football team who were playing someone or other on Saturday. Another contrast, SJ thought uneasily, glancing at her own chewed nails before hiding them in her lap. Not that she'd have painted her nails with red crosses, even if she'd had any to paint. Most of the black cabs sported flags sticking out at right angles. She was surprised there was no big screen in here. You couldn't usually get away from the football when England were playing. Something's obviously wrong. You're not having problems with Tom, are you? SJ shook her head and put her glass back on the table. It was empty, she realised with a small shock. Tania followed her gaze. You needed that, didn't you, you little alky? Many a true word spoken in jest. Want another? No. SJ knew the no had come out as a yelp. I can't, I'm working later. Tania, do you think I drink too much? Sometimes, maybe, but no more than anyone else we know. Why? Are you worried? SJ took a deep breath. Tania was bound to worm it out of her sooner or later, and to her surprise, she had a strong urge to confess. This morning's honesty, even though she'd lied about her name, had been cathartic. I'm a bit worried. I've just been to an alcohol advisory place. I wanted to get some reassurance. Tania rested her chin on her hands and looked interested and concerned simultaneously. And were they reassuring? No, they seemed to think I am drinking too much. So what did they suggest? That I cut down. SJ stared at her empty glass and wished she didn't want a refill so badly. That's going well then? Tania gave her a wry smile. Do you want to cut down? What I really want to do right now is get absolutely blotto. I think it's the stress. It was a shock finding out that I might have, a problem. Why did you go there in the first place? Because a few weeks ago, when Tom was away, I got so drunk I couldn't remember what happened. It was awful. Oh, you poor darling. Tania's voice was all concern, which made it worse. We've all been there. It's the kind of thing that happens at parties. You get carried away and don't realise how much you've had. It doesn't mean you're an alcoholic. I wasn't at a party. SJ could feel her face heating up. I was at home, watching a movie. It was just a normal Sunday night. You mean you were on your own? Are you shocked? Of course I'm not shocked. Well, maybe a bit surprised. I knew you drank, but I didn't know it had got out of hand. Were you upset about anything? No, I don't think so. I just opened this bottle of wine, and it was going down well, so I opened another. I drank most of that. I mean, I felt fine. I didn't even feel particularly drunk until I got up to let Ash out. I'd locked him in the kitchen by mistake, poor love, and he was barking. An image of Ash, their greyhound, named for his silver coat, flooded her mind, and she felt a wash of sadness and guilt. Then what happened? SJ hesitated, wondering whether to confess all. No, she definitely couldn't bear to relive it. Not now. Maybe not ever. I finished the wine and passed out. She shut her eyes. She hadn't told Kit about that occasion, which had certainly been more than a 14-unit night. Mind you, she'd felt too ill to drink the following day, which probably cancelled it out. But that was a one-off, right? Tania probed. Well, I don't get that drunk very often, obviously. What does Tom say about it? He's never said anything. I didn't tell him I was going to that place today. Will you tell him now? Yeah, I guess, if he gets back from work before midnight. Tania looked worried. You two aren't having problems, are you, SJ? I don't really see him enough for that. I see. SJ stared at her empty glass. Tania had been married for 15 years. According to Tania, Michael was her soulmate, and she'd never looked at another man since they'd met. SJ had always admired her for that. She and Tom had only been married 3 years, and they didn't have the same closeness. At least, they didn't these days. He was too busy. A part of her suspected they never had. Me and Tom are okay, it's just me who has the problem. She had a sudden urge to cry. She swallowed hard, the longing for another drink overwhelming. She was desperate for a cigarette too. Perhaps she should suggest they sat outside. But if you have got a problem, then surely you've done the right thing. You've asked for help. That's a positive step, isn't it? Yeah, I guess. This was not at all what she wanted to hear. Tania was being far too sensible. What she was supposed to say was, of course SJ wasn't an alkie, she just drank socially like everyone else. If Tania had been a really good friend, she would have suggested they get a bottle and go back to hers. Then she could get as drunk as she liked. They'd done that a lot when they were younger, had the day off and gone to the pub for an extended lunchtime, and then finished the day at one or other of their houses, sitting in the garden on sun lounges, gossiping and giggling. SJ brightened at the thought of doing the same now, before remembering Tania didn't have the day off. Neither did she. She was supposed to be marking essays. I don't suppose you fancy another drink, do you? I haven't touched this one yet. The truth of that stood between them on the table, and suddenly SJ was ashamed of herself. I'm sorry, no, of course you haven't. I don't know what's wrong with me. I think you've had a wake-up call, Tania said gently. Look, I'm sorry too. I'm not judging you. Do you want to talk about it? As Tania spoke, her mobile buzzed with a text, and SJ felt a flash of relief as, momentarily distracted, her friend picked it up. Now she'd started, she did want to talk, but the sense of unreality was back. Was she really sitting here telling her best friend she had a drink problem? She'd been drinking for years. They all did. It was the fabric of their social life. A girly chat over a lunchtime drink, a bottle of wine with dinner, a summer barbecue when Tania and Michael were staying over and none of them were driving. How had it suddenly become a problem? It hadn't, until she'd gone into sad. She wished fervently she could rewind this morning and go back to blissful ignorance. Everyone she knew drank loads. Kit would have a field day with some of her friends. They couldn't all be alcoholics, could they? Aware that Tania had finished reading her text and was waiting for her to answer, she decided it was time to change the subject. Who was texting you? Was it business or pleasure? Oh, just a friend. Tania looked flushed, 2 bright dots of colour reddening her cheekbones, but before SJ could follow this up, Tania put her phone back in her bag. We're talking about you, not me. What else did they say? Are they going to tell your doctor? No, they couldn't, even if they wanted to. I didn't give them my real name. What did you say your name was then? Sarah Carter. Tania raised her eyebrows incredulously. Well, that's okay then. No one can possibly work that out. Sarah Jane is your name, and Carter's your maiden name, isn't it? Yes, but I'm not Sarah Jane anymore. No one calls me that except Mum, and I'm Crosse, not Carter. It's different. Tania shook her head. Wouldn't it have been better to tell them your name was Jess or Emma or something? Probably. SJ sighed. It was a rubbish alias. She kicked off her shoes, which were trendy but crippling. They went with her Sarah Carter image. Cool city girl, someone who doesn't have to try too hard, someone who doesn't care too much. Except the image, like the shoes, didn't quite fit. A shrink would have a field day with that. Good job Kit wasn't a shrink, or she definitely wouldn't have agreed to go back. She realised she was already searching for a reason not to return. Then she could forget all about this morning's little chat, which, as well as being cathartic, had brought some very unsettling feelings to the surface, and carry on as normal. Well, she'd cut down, of course, but not quite as much as Kit had suggested. Everyone knew the government guidelines were unrealistic. Why don't we head back to mine? It's more private there, and we can talk properly. Tania's voice was soft, and SJ glanced wistfully at her glass and wondered whether she should suggest getting a bottle to take with them. It was much easier to talk about problems over a few glasses of wine. Maybe I could get... Don't even think about it, Tania interrupted with a frown. I wouldn't be much of a friend if I encouraged you to get into even more trouble than you're already in. Look, I've probably made this sound worse than it really is. SJ decided she'd prefer to go home after all. She had some nice cold Soave in the fridge. They didn't actually say I was an alcoholic. They didn't even say I had to stop drinking. Tania looked sceptical. Anyway, what about your client? You can't let him down. He's relying on you. I'll phone him. It's not urgent. I'm going to help you out with this one, SJ. You won't have to deal with it on your own. She gave a sweet smile of solidarity, which was probably meant to be reassuring, but had the effect of making SJ reach for her fags as they got to the door. I can catch up with work tomorrow, Tania added, as they stepped out into the sun. I think in the circumstances, this is more important, don't you? SJ was about to say it wasn't, when Tania touched her arm. When I lost Maddie, you were there for me, SJ. You were there every step of the way. Every hospital appointment, every phone call, even when I called you in the middle of the night. That was different. You were grieving. It was not different. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I wouldn't have got through it without you."
SJ swallowed. Tania hardly ever mentioned Maddie, the baby she and Michael had longed for and planned, and then lost when she was born 3 months prematurely. And now, as she looked into her friend's green eyes, she could see tears glittering. She took a deep lungful of smoke, blew it out into the summer air, and felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Okay, thanks. If you're sure you don't mind, I'll come back to yours. I could really do with a chat." Chapter 4. Talking had been good, SJ thought, as she left the crowded tube station later that afternoon and walked the last part of her journey home through the beginning of the rush hour. She and Tania had been friends since uni, but she'd never been as frank as she'd been today, and knowing Tania would never blab about what she'd told her, not even to Michael, had strengthened the bond between them. It was an us-against-the-world feeling, similar to the one she'd had when she'd become blood sisters with the girl next door when she was 10. Tom's car wasn't in the drive, SJ noticed as she climbed the marble steps that led to their front door. Not that she was surprised. He'd said he'd probably have to work late. Ash was in his favourite position, on his blanket by the range cooker, and he thumped his tail lazily but didn't bother getting up to greet her. "Garden," she told him, unlocking the back door. "Come on, you lazy lump. Out." Yawning, he stretched and reluctantly strolled across the kitchen, blinking and pausing for a head stroke when he reached her. He was old now for a greyhound. They didn't know exactly how old because he'd been a rescue. "Dumped on the North Circular," the dog's home had explained. But his soft grey muzzle was flecked with white, and he'd developed a little paunch lately. Too many titbits, probably. He was a terrible scrounger, and she couldn't resist his melting brown eyes. Still, everyone was entitled to a little paunch when they got older. Thinking about it, she was getting one herself. That was another thing that hit you when you got past 35, although actually she was only 36. It got harder to keep off the weight, especially round the tummy, which was her weak point. She'd been as thin as a reed when she was younger, but now she was size 14 on a good day. Fortunately, she was tall, so it didn't look too bad, although she'd noticed lately if she told someone she was planning on going on a diet, they didn't look amazed and say, "Don't be silly, SJ, there's nothing of you." Well, apart from her mum, who was also tall and shopped at Evans for most of her clothes. But mums didn't count. They saw you with mother eyes, not objective ones. Perhaps she could try Slimming Club again. It hadn't worked last time because the only way she could keep within the calorie allowance and still drink was to eat virtually nothing at all. But if she was cutting down the wine, it might be feasible. She could actually get to eat something this time. Another advantage of not drinking so much. She'd be slim and a millionaire. SJ had never cared much about money, but it would be lovely to rediscover her hip bones. From the doorway, she watched Ash cock his leg leisurely on the honeysuckle and marvelled at the size of the bladder he must have. He only ever went in the garden if she made him, and then he could wee for a good 60 seconds non-stop and not need to go again until the next day. She lit a fag and went outside to join him. She'd promised Tom she would give up smoking this summer, but she hadn't quite managed it yet. Behind Ash, the sun cast a golden light across the rose-trellised arch that led up to the furthest reaches of their narrow but beautifully secluded long garden. The garden was one of the things that had sold them this house. It was big for a townhouse garden in Barking and was an oasis of tranquility, edged by rose bushes and surrounded by hedges and mature trees that shut out the prying eyes of neighbours. There was a wooden summerhouse in the middle section, and at the far end a lily pond lay in the shadow of a willow tree. When they'd first come to view the place, they'd stepped out of the back door and been captivated. Tom had put his arm around her and said, "Think of us coming back from a hard day's work, SJ, and sitting outside the summerhouse with a nice bottle of wine. What could be better? Our own little Garden of Eden." She had leaned against the solid, secure bulk of him and thought, yes, a Garden of Eden. It would have been better, of course, if Adam had actually been present a little more often, as opposed to Eve having to flit around Eden by herself,
But you couldn't have everything. Tom was busy working. He was trying to get a promotion. It wouldn't be forever. Good boy, she praised Ash before wandering back inside. She settled down to do some marking, but abandoned it after about 10 minutes. It was easier to concentrate with a drink, but it was a bit early to start the 3/4 of a bottle she'd agreed with Kit. The form he'd given her was in her bag. She and Tania had discussed it earlier. Why have you got to put your thoughts and feelings on it? Tania had asked curiously. I thought they just wanted to know how much you drink. They're trying to establish whether your drinking follows a pattern, SJ explained, to see if there are trigger points, certain emotions you're trying to avoid by drinking. You know, all that unresolved issues stuff I studied in psychology, which there aren't in my case, obviously. I just like the stuff. It's relaxing, isn't it? How about unresolved issues with Alison? Tania had asked, with one of her irritating raised eyebrows looks. Everyone has unresolved issues with their sister. It's par for the course. I don't. Luckily, Tania's mobile had buzzed with another text. She seemed to get an awful lot of them. By the time she'd read it, the unresolved issues with your sister moment had passed.